In part 2 of learning about the three branches, we are going to start our discussion with the executive branch. And yes, the executive branch has to do with the White House and the President of the United States. So the head of the executive branch is going to be the President, which is also called the Chief Executive. In electing the President, we've already learned a little bit about the Electoral College, but the President is elected by a group of electors. Today, this is called the electoral houses. The number of electoral votes a state gets depends on their members in the Senate and in the House of Representatives. So as we learned in the last chapter, Iowa, who has 2 members in the Senate and 4 members in the House of Representatives, has 6 total electors in the Electoral College. To win, a presidential candidate needs a majority of electoral votes, and we've learned that number today is 270. This president also serves a 4-year term. This is deemed in the Constitution. Later, an amendment was made that said a president can serve no longer than 8 years in office. In giving the oath, as you see the president doing in the picture, the oath calls for the president to defend the Constitution. When looking at the executive branch has many powers. These powers include being commander-in-chief, which means they are in charge of the nation's military. They also have the power to make treaties with consent from the Senate. They have the power to nominate ambassadors, which ambassadors are representatives to other countries. Our former governor, Terry Branstad, was appointed an ambassador to China by President Trump. That's why we have a new governor in the state of Iowa for the 2017 year. The president then also grants pardons or forgiveness to people convicted of violating national laws. The president is not the only person in the executive branch. Departments were created in the executive branch to help carry out the duties. Some of these departments include the State Department, in which they handle relations with other countries, the Justice Department, which is involved in law enforcement as well as court actions, and there are now currently over a dozen departments to help execute the duties of the executive branch. There's also the President's Cabinet. The President's Cabinet members consist of the heads of these departments, over the dozen departments that we just went over. In order to become president, you must be at least 35 years old, and you must be a natural-born citizen of the United States. That means if you are born in another country, you are not allowed to become the President of the United States. A couple more things about the executive branch has to do with the powers to remove the president. Congress has the power to remove a president and other officials from office if they commit certain crimes. The House of Representatives can vote to actually impeach or remove the president. If the House of Representatives votes yes to impeaching the president, the Senate then puts the president on trial, and the senators serve as the jury. So the House votes, and the Senate is the final decision to see if the president has to be removed. If found guilty by the Senate, then the president is officially removed from office. There's been 2 presidents that have been impeached by the House of Representatives. Both were actually acquitted, which means relieved from their crimes by the Senate. So they weren't officially removed from office, but the House of Representatives did vote, and then the Senate heard a trial of them and acted as their jury. These presidents included Andrew Johnson and Bill Clinton, as you can see in the picture on the bottom right-hand corner. Andrew Johnson escaped actual impeachment by 1 vote. Next, in our 3-part series, we're going to learn about the judicial branch. When talking about the judicial branch, we are going to discuss the Supreme Court. When talking first about the Supreme Court, we have to understand the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. No other laws or actions by the government or by the state can conflict with the Constitution. The Constitution has the final say. The official job of the judicial branch is to protect the Constitution. They also help interpret the Constitution when it comes to laws. The judicial branch consists of a system of federal courts and judges. The country's highest court is known as the Supreme Court. There's also smaller courts within the judicial system, and these are called federal courts. These federal courts have the power to resolve disputes that involve national laws, the federal government or the states. The Supreme Court is the last stop in the judicial system. Therefore, all decisions are final. Along the way, a bunch of other trials and hearings are held in the federal court system, the smaller courts. Only the large cases are heard by the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court consists of 9 members. This number is actually set by Congress, and the Constitution does not specify any number of members on the Supreme Court. Once appointed to the Supreme Court, the justices serve on the court for their entire life. These justices are appointed by the President of the United States. When President Trump was elected, one of his first big decisions was appointing an open seat in the Supreme Court. There is also no age or citizenship requirement in the Constitution that deals with the judicial branch and the Supreme Court members. Currently, here are our 9 Supreme Court members. In learning more about the judicial branch, we know that Supreme Court only reviews a case if the justices think a decision made by some lower courts might conflict with the Constitution or the federal law. Their main job is to resolve these disputes under the law of the Constitution. They interpret the Constitution and resolve certain disputes that may infringe on the Constitution. After hearing statements from both sides, justices then debate among themselves if this law is constitutional or not, or if the dispute is constitutional or not. Decisions are then announced and explained in writing. One of the big court cases that was solved by the U.S. Supreme Court was called Brown versus Board of Education, and this had to do with segregation in public schools. The Supreme Court also has the power of judicial review. Judicial review is the power to decide whether laws and acts are made by the legislative and executive branches conflict with the Constitution. They make sure the laws that they pass are constitutional. Judicial review gives them the power to declare a law unconstitutional, and therefore it will be removed. Courts around the country rely on the Supreme Court for guidance about what is constitutional and what is not constitutional. Judicial review gives the Supreme Court great power in its role of protecting the supreme law of the land.